Привет, привет.
Who here has played Duke Nukem 3D? Wow, a lot of old school fans. That shirt's an original.
Original. Never been worn until
When did George had those made in like 96, right?
96, yeah. And this one I happened to just save, and I thought, today's a good day.
You put this closer to your mouth.
What, like that?
Yes.
Ah.
So that was a big moment when everybody on the team got the T-shirts.
Yeah, it was, because we finished the game.
Now there's one T-shirt that you have that says Level Designer, because we also got T-shirts that had our roles, and then yours says Levelord, and that one's currently in a frame, and it's at the National Video Game Museum in America, in Frisco, Texas.
Yeah, we had finished Duke Nukem, and then all of us went. That's where Randy and I met, actually. The E3, everyone knows the E3 is the big convention in Los Angeles once a year, and first time I'd been, and I know first time he had been too. And so I had one of these shirts, and me being me, I put with there's paint you can paint on material, and it stays there. And I put in big red letters, Levelord. And now he's got it in his museum.
So what's interesting about this, some of you might, I've been making video games for 20, 25 years now. And some of you, it was weird to get the introduction suggesting that I'm a legend. I feel like I'm just a kid. Like this guy was one of the guys that I looked up to when I was a young game developer trying to figure out how to make video games. And I remember when I joined your company to meet you. Oh yeah, here's a photograph if you're curious. This was us. 20
years ago.
So there's Richard. There's me over there.
This is March of 1999, so it's just a little over 20 years ago.
Yeah. And that's Alan Blum there, who's probably, I think, more credit to the creation of Duke Nukem goes to Alan than any other single person.
And he was there was two level designers back then for the whole game, me and Alan. And not to be overly humble, but Alan really was he most of the cool stuff in the game he thought of, and I stole. And then George Siegler, probably a lot.
Joe Siegler.
Yeah.
And this is Doug Wood, who went on to be one of the founders of Valve Software, and he did a lot of the characters and animation in Half-Life. Hey, Richard, I wanted to ask you, since you were one of the veterans when I was getting started, how did you get into game development?
It would have to have been Wolfenstein. Does everyone remember Wolfenstein? Yeah, of course, yeah. So I don't know. And that really was, and I think it legitimately was, but for me that was the very first-person shooter with true 3D, even though it was just sprites. And at the time, I had a regular job being a software engineer at an aerospace company. And Wolfenstein came out, and just that's what everyone was doing. It showed it up at not a game show, but like a gun show. It's America. And someone brought it to the company. And then came Doom, and then...
Yeah. Wolfenstein, I also credit Wolfenstein 3D as the video game that changed my interests as both a gamer and a game developer from being like strategy and role-playing games to being action games.
Yeah, and on the
computer. It was Wolfenstein that did it.
Yeah.
So how did you come to join 3D Realms then? If Wolfenstein inspired you to get into game development, like how did you get connected with 3D Realms?
Wolfenstein had come out, and then Doom came out, and Doom was the real for almost everybody from my generation in games, and Randy, that whole first 10, 15 years, Doom came out, which was of course even a more influential game. But along with it, and with id Software's blessing, came out a utility called DEU, the Doom editing utility, and they freely gave out the data types for all the wall definitions and the monsters and how to apply textures, and so you could go in and make your first levels on your own. I think that was the first real game that you could do that. And
I, if I'm mistaken, correct me, but I believe, I remember we were on CompuServe.
Yeah,
do you remember that back in the
action?
It was like before the internet.
Yeah, A&E, AOL.
AOL, and there was on CompuServe, which was one of the first kind of connected networks, we dial in from our modems to a local node using a local number, and it connected us together. It was like a proto-internet, and we would use the Action Games Forum to trade our content that we were creating for Doom.
Yeah, you could talk back and forth. Before that, there were BBSs. I don't know if binary bulletin boards, and those were not usable.
No, they were great. In fact, we used to play Doom on bulletin boards that had tools that would basically hack the bulletin board to think that 4 players were connected together over an IPX LAN.
A whole 4 players.
Yeah, 4-player multiplayer was a big deal. But man,
not to digress too far. Doom came out with the editor, and I immediately I went home. The first thing I did was I took the first level, E1, L1, M1, and I don't know if you remember the first level in Doom. You come into a small circular room, and there's stairs. Stairs were brand new in Doom, and you'd go up the stairs, and there was a window that you couldn't get through. It was the top and the bottom were too close together. And the first thing I did was I went into the editor and moved the floor down and the ceiling up, and then loaded the level in the game. And I went up and I walked through, and it was like a religious experience. The view was to an outside area that you're not supposed to be there. And I went out and I was like, like I'm free, like a prisoner. And from then on, every waking moment, like I'm sure you did, every waking moment I spent making levels for.
Do you remember? So Doom. It started with DoomEd or DEU and some of the other editors that other people had made for Doom. When did you first get your hands on the build engine?
That would have been with Blood.
Yeah.
And
does anyone remember the game Blood?
Yeah.
Yeah. So Blood was Monolith, but they made the game with a license of the build engine from Apogee and 3D Realms.
Yeah, they became Q Studios by the time I...
That's right, yeah.
But they were, at the time, I thought, by doing levels, like Randy was saying, and putting them up on CompuServe, a lot of us were trying to get the attention of the game development companies, id specifically. That's what I wanted. I didn't even really know about Apogee, other than like their little side-scrollers, like Duke Nukem side-scroller. But I caught the attention of Nick Newhard with Q Studios and working on Blood, which at the time I had seen Duke Nukem screenshots, but Blood was a much better looking game and further along. They were already doing cool stuff, bridges and just a better atmosphere. And so within about 6 months, I'd been making levels for them, and within about 6 months, George Broussard at 3D Realms, at the same time Q Studios wanted to hire me, 3D Realms wanted to hire me, and then I decided on going to them because Apogee is about 5 miles, about 8 kilometers from the id office, and I thought, oh boy, I'm going to go work at Apogee or 3D Realms and get over to.
Some people did.
Yeah, some people did.
There was a door going in both directions. Actually, I remember my first day working at Apogee and 3D Realms, meeting Sean Green, who was the IT guy for us at 3D Realms, and he was one of the, like, if you look at the original Doom credits, he's one of like the 6 names that are there, and it was a very tight community back there in Dallas, and it really was. That was where the first-person shooter was created.
Yeah.
And that time was really interesting. All of us together there. Let me ask you. You talk about id Software, and I'm guessing that the games were great, obviously, but there was more to it than just the games from an inspiration point of view. What designers influenced you as you began making levels?
You mean game designers?
Yeah.
I guess it would only be Doom, but I tried to stay away from other games because I didn't want to be influenced and just start copying. You sort of get tunnel vision. And there weren't a lot of games to be influenced by first-person shooters, as you said, that they were just getting started.
Were any of the specific designers more impactful? Like, the stuff that I remember when I was coming up, I dissected John Romero's work. and Tom Hall's work.
Yeah.
And we got to work with Tom Hall
Yeah,
because
yeah.
he was at
He was
Apogee
another one that- yeah.
at the same time working on the Prey.
Yeah. Both of those are still really
Yeah.
good guys.
I love Tom Hall and John. They're both
Yeah.
dear friends. I got to ask you, where did Levelord come from?
That came from when I was first started working with the guys at Blood, the Q Studios, sending emails. I just wanted to come up with a. Today, avatars are very common. Everyone has an identity and even an image to go along with it, and part of that is because you can sort of hide behind it, and you can say things like, "Isn't that Levelord great?" You can talk about yourself in the third person, and people don't quite catch on. In fact, I got the first thing I did on CompuServe was I got 4 levels together, Doom levels. I didn't release just one. I got 4 of them together and had documentation and descriptions and stuff. But one person, I would love to meet him again today, but one person, we know them now as trolls, came up because my levels wouldn't load right away. He came up and made this scathing reply in the forums like, "Don't bother downloading these levels. They're horrible. They won't even load." And I typed back very graciously, "If you knew who we were," using "we," it was, if you knew who we were, you wouldn't say things like that. And he was like, "Oh, who are you?" And so it worked. I would love to meet whoever that was. I would love to.
Your first troll.
My first troll, before there were trolls.
So you started using the handle Levelord. I remember you were Levelord on CompuServe, and one of the things that I remember that I loved that you used to do was you would, in secret areas in your maps, you would put little messages to the player, and you would sign them. Like there would be a secret area that it was really hidden, wasn't a place that the player was supposed to be, but you anticipated that we would go there, and you'd write a message like, "You're not supposed to be here," and he'd sign it the Levelord.
Yeah,
what motivated that?
Well, no, there were secrets. Again, I'm not sure how far back we're going that people don't know, but those are called Easter eggs because you find them like an Easter egg. They're a surprise, even though you're sort of looking for these things. You don't know where to look, but they go back. I forget how far. In fact, there's still people I know, very very intelligent, smart people, that are still looking for the very first and how to define the first Easter egg and the one they always go back to is the game Adventure. It was a text adventure game that was called Colossal Cave and Advent.
The original Atari Adventure.
Yeah.
William Robinet put his name in the map, hidden in the map, and there was a sequence you could do to unlock it. And for many years, that was actually believed to be the first Easter egg. But Ed Fries,
he's the guy. Yeah,
he found an earlier example.
Yeah, on a console, on an arcade game.
Yeah. But talking about signing maps, one of the things we all did in the build editor when we build our maps. And were you the first guy to do it, or was it Alan?
I think that's Alan. Yeah.
Yeah. So Alan, in the corner of the grid, he would make a room that, if you looked at it from the top-down map view, it would spell out his initials, right? So he had AB3, Alan Blum III.
Yeah.
And so we all started signing our maps, putting our initials in the maps. And
just in case.
Richard Levelord didn't put Levelord, and he didn't put Richard Gray. What letters did you put in your maps?
I can't remember.
I do.
The letters were S-U-Y-T.
The letters were S-U-Y-T.
Show us your tatas. No, we had that came.
Like that's going to be the path.
Well, no, that came
to
from
meeting girls. Richard is
that's true.
These throngs of women loading your map and seeing the initials in there, and you write, "Show us your tits."
I was lonely for a long time, but no, that came from the whole Duke Nukem sort of atmosphere was to get as risque as possible, and even to where we had in America things are just crazy. You can literally have a baby in a game and shoot the baby with a shotgun and kaboom with blood. That's okay. Well, now you get violence, but at that point you could do that, but you can't show a naked breast back then.
A naked female breast.
Naked female.
Yeah, you can show naked male breasts.
All you want, even fat, hairy ones. But anyhow, so we would, as best we could, like one of the secrets, I think I had one in the Abyss. You'd find a cave, and there'd be a gyrating woman. But everything, she had like a bikini, string bikini on. But on the back wall, I put SUYT, which sort of became a catchphrase of.
Do you remember where you and I first met?
The only thing I remember is you doing magic at the hotel. It was at E3, the first E3, and I remember thinking, and that's what I dug up this picture because if you look at this kid over here, I think he still had braces.
Yeah, I have braces on my teeth in that photograph.
And then me, I'm like 40 years old almost here. But first meeting Randy in E3, and you had that exuberance and excitement, and oh boy, and you just knew you were going to catch. And then he's doing magic before he got into games. He was doing magic, professional magic, and I'm thinking, how's this guy? You guys, you were at the table with George, and I was sort of like back here watching, and in my head I'm thinking, come on, and George is just watching like this, and I'm thinking it's not going to work. He's never going to get in the game industry with silly card tricks, and here we are. He owns a huge big company. I'm a pensioner, a happy pensioner.
That was awesome. Back then. That was the very first E3, the Electronic Entertainment Expo.
It was the third one, the third E3. It was the first one we had been to.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And they were in LA for a couple of years, and then they moved to Atlanta.
Yeah.
And then they went back to LA. And back then the demo machine, it was like a 19-inch CRT monitor.
Yeah.
And there's just one machine that we were showing Duke Nukem on, and that evening we went to. We went out. George took us out
to a SUYT place.
Yeah, to an SUYT place, and I stayed up. I think that evening until about 6 a.m, rebuilding the place where we went out in the build editor, and I brought it into E3 the next day on a 3.5-inch floppy drive, and loaded my map into the demo machine at E3. This was just this thing I just built the night before. Like, you can't do anything like that anymore. E3's the trade show is totally a different environment now, but
it was just a reflection of that. Was as everyone knows, like 2016 we got together again to do a 20th anniversary of Duke, and I of course put in my secret rooms and stuff. And nowadays they needed a copy of they needed a screenshot of every single secret I had. All of us, both Alan and I. Because nowadays you get caught for things and just
people sue you.
They sue you and just cause misery. Yeah. But back then we got away with a lot of stuff. A lot of stuff.
One of the, thinking about those early years back at the beginning of the first-person shooter genre and working with everybody we got to work with at Apogee and 3D Realms, and when you guys started your own company, you then got to work on Quake.
Yeah, that was just good
with
luck.
The id guys, and that's awesome.
Yeah, that was.
Well, remind me what were some of the, because you used to, one of the things I loved about your designs is you would kind of go in these interesting directions, and if I'm mistaken, one of your maps in the Quake add-on, there were a couple that were really interesting, but one we were playing with scale a lot, right?
Yeah.
Remind me what that was.
That one came from. I'm not sure who's played, and that. No, the scale one. The first part of that was in our first game, Sin, which came after the Quake pack. But in that, we got just. I couldn't believe the luck to have worked on Duke Nukem, which was not supposed to be such a big hit. We all knew it was going to be good, but it turned out to very quickly. And remember, it was competing against Quake 1 came out just about the same time, which was a full 3D models. It wasn't sprites. And because Duke Nukem was fun, it doesn't matter about, as we know, it doesn't matter so much about technology. It matters that the game's fun. But I forget where I was going.
We're talking
Quake.
About scale and the Quake map.
Yeah, and falling into Quake was just like, oh my! I thought, here we go. Where's my first mansion, and how many cars am I going to buy? The first miniature game was on Sin. Quake 1 was an add-on pack, and in just 6 months we were done. But our first game, I made a small. We used to as also you probably know, is that there's a lot of crunching, it's called, in the game industry, where you're working long hours for many weeks, months sometimes, sleeping in the office. And it becomes a habit you order pizza for dinner and you all go into the rec room to have a food together for 10 or 15 minutes. But The Simpsons, the cartoon in the beginning, where it always starts with them running into the couch and there's always something different. One of the nights we were there eating pizza, they come running in, and the living room is very big, and they're just small little people. And I thought, that would be a cool level. And then everyone said, no, but it's going to be a big room, and frame rate won't let you do that. And then I said, remember hit DM1. You can you can do that. That's where the connection with Quake 1.
Yeah. And we worked together when we were doing Half-Life Opposing Force. I asked if you would do some multiplayer maps for Half-Life for us. Yeah, that was a lot of fun.
Once again, fell into Half-Life was, I think everybody agrees, at least for back then, was the best first-person shooter. They just had everything down pat. But Randy and his company were doing one of the first add-on packs, Opposing Force.
What did you think about the difference between working on levels in Half-Life versus working on levels in Quake?
I didn't find any difference other than the different buttons. There was
the triggerings, what you could trigger.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean.
Oh, and the hotkeys on the editors.
In the editor, it's the same tool. It's just different ways of doing it. And then the game itself, I'm not sure. I tend to think I like Quake and id technology better because I used it more. It was more, like how your mom's cooking is the best in the world, and then even when you meet your wife, her cooking is the best, but still, Mom, Mom still has a special place. Well,
it was interesting, since Valve's engine, the source engine, was actually Quake.
Yeah.
Just iterated.
Yeah.
That they felt very similar as engines go, but There's always that translation. I don't know how many of you guys have gone from one platform to the next, but even when you have something so close, the subtle differences feel extreme when you're in it, and it's like a whole different
and have to work with
whole different universe. Let's see. I had some other questions I wanted to ask you. You've gotten after you moved to Moscow. I don't know if you guys know this. Levelord lives in Moscow, which is kind of trippy, right? When we were kids, the idea of just visiting Russia seemed impossible, let alone like moving there. And you've made a life for yourself here, but you've not been developing games much recently.
I retired happily.
Yeah, and I keep trying to drag you in.
Well, maybe we can talk.
A couple years ago, you worked with Alan to create a new episode for Duke Nukem 3D.
No, I would do that again. I would do it for free. No, I would do it.
By the way, do you remember the first royalty check you ever made?
Yeah, I do. That was your game. Yeah. That was nice.
Yeah.
The very first official. I'd been making games for 20 years, and then went into this semi-retirement. I'm a lot older than most people. I was already 40 when I started. But the very first. I mean, of course, when I was part of Ritual, we got paid more money than we had spent, so we got extra money. But it was never a royalty check. I never got a royalty check. And my very first one, and I wasn't expecting it, was about maybe 5 or 6 months it paid out. The Duke's, yeah. And I got this, it's electronic now, you don't get an actual check, but I got this strange email from Gearbox, and I thought, uh-oh, usually emails are not good for me. I mean, ones you don't expect, you think, oh no, I owe taxes or something. And it's this royalty check, and I saved the email and everything. It was the very first one.
That was fun though. I don't know, for those that don't know, we did a new episode for Duke Nukem 3D using the original tools.
Yeah.
And there were originally 3 episodes in Duke Nukem 3D, and then we worked on a 4th episode that was part of the Plutonium Pack and the Atomic Edition, and that was developed in 1997. and then 20 years go by, and Gearbox helped release the 20th anniversary world tour of Duke Nukem 3D, and we included a 5th original episode that was built by Richard and Alan. And it was such a joy to play content that you guys created using the original tools. What was that like to go back to that engine after 20 years?
It really is. I won't, but I would do it for free. It was so much fun. But it was, again, because you crunch, more so back then, 25 years ago, there were no rules yet, and we worked like dogs. I mean, there was no weekends for a year and a half, no holidays, Christmas and New Year's, you got a day. But so you get it in your bread, you get it in your brain, like when they do in prison, and they try and conform you to the brainwash you. Where you're working there, I'm working on Duke Nukem, and Alan is sitting right there for 18 months, day and night. And he would always know more. I would always go to him to ask questions, even after I'd been there for a year. Again, Alan should be here. He's just smarter than I am. But and so I got in the habit of, hey, Alan, how do you, back in 1996, and when we're working on this now, I'm living in Moscow, right down the street, and Alan's in California, I think.
In San Diego.
San Diego, California. And no exaggeration, I'd be a little tired because I was self-imposing crunch mode because I was having fun. Like 9 hours later, and I'd like, Al, damn it. And I'd have to send him. I'd have to email him my question, and he would answer it. But yeah, it was a blast doing that. And then I think we did a pretty good job on the levels. It was nice to, again, you're going back in time in your brain, and like I'm building a room, and I'm thinking, oh, frame rate. Because back then you really had to be very precious with how many surfaces you had. And now I was just like, cut that wall into 20 different pieces so you can make separate windows that open.
We're using a 20-year-old engine on modern PCs. Do you remember what our benchmark was, what our min spec was for Duke 3D?
It was not a 486. What was the next one?
I remember.
The first Pentium?
It was a Pentium 60.
60.
And we had to get 15 frames per second.
Yeah.
We also supported the DX266, the 66 megahertz.
Ooh.
Holy crap, we've come a long way.
Small, the
and that was a 486.
Yeah, 486. No, but I mean the dimensions.
Yeah, you had to shrink the screen down.
640 by 480.
Yeah, but you had to shrink the screen down to like 320.
Yeah.
In order to get it to run at 15 frames per second.
So anyhow, it was a lot of fun, and I wouldn't mind doing stuff like that again. And then what about? Do you mention Hollywood or anything?
What about Hollywood?
Just no. Okay.
Working on a movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. We'll see. We've got a couple of things in development right now for Duke Nukem. They're in development, and it is Hollywood, so no promises. But there's an animated television series in development, and there's also a feature film in development. And with luck, these could be real things.
Yeah, that would be nice.
Yeah.
And a breakfast cereal like Angry Birds.
And it'll be interesting, especially, remembering back, like to think about that leap. I remember when we were working at Apogee, like we were on a coaxial network. Do you guys know what a coaxial network is? If it was all basically in a line, so if one computer went down, the whole network went down. It was a whole different era.
Yeah.
And we weren't connected to the internet at all.
And we were happy for it because it was cutting edge.
Yeah,
It was
thrilled.
better than before when you.
Yeah, we had to move the data around with disks before we got the network. That was a big upgrade. What do you think it'll take to get you back into world building?
Lots of money. No, I don't know. I'm already dabbling now. Again, I've been back in like 2008. I decided games got too complicated for me, first-person shooters in particular, and I had been working on casual games. But even then, it was the size of the teams and the meetings and the documentation for other people. But I still.
What was your favorite team size? Like, where does it get too big?
It would have been Duke Nukem. And the first add-on pack was still that we did for Quake. Duke Nukem was about 8 people. the core people. We had some outside artists and somebody would show up and help with this and that. But basically, it was 8 people and got the whole game done. And that includes George Broussard and Greg Malone, the management, the producers, and the admin part. But and then I think a safe, if I remember right, it was like 12 people for the add-on pack for Quake back then.
Yeah.
And what was nice about that was that we would have meetings, but they'd be more like real quick huddles, because basically we're making the entire game. We're all in the same room, so you didn't have to get together to communicate. You were already as you were making it.
Yeah.
And that was really nice.
Except for Chuck Jones. He was on the other side of the...
For good reasons. He was one of the artists. He did all the
monsters.
The monsters for Duke Nukem, and a lot of them for Half-Life.
Yeah. He was one of the initial guys at Valve. Did all the Half-Life monsters.
Yeah, he's scary good.
Really talented guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, but scary. He was a tattoo artist.
Yeah, and in Dallas, tattoo artist.
Let's see.
Yeah, he's still around.
We'll talk for a few more minutes, but if any of you guys have any questions for Richard or for I about the old days,
I don't know why
we'll open it up in a minute. So yeah, think about. You know what? Actually, if you have questions right now, we'll just go ahead and take them. But think about it if you have more. You raised your hand here in the front row. What? Yeah.
I'll put a mic. I think
we'll get a mic up
somewhere here, and yeah, you can ask.
So thank you very much for your talk. You're legends. And the question is, nowadays, Unity and Unreal editors, they have built-in software to build levels, but some people say that Hammer engine and other engines that were before were better, even better, for level design. What do you think about the modern tools? And don't you think that Hammer engine was better than the one that used now?
Do you want me to take that one?
Sure, you probably know more.
Yeah. So it's always every successive generation of technology and tools. I remember every move I made, and for me, I was always one of those people that was always excited to get a new tool and to take a leap forward in technology. But I remember there was always developers around me. There's always 1 or 2 guys around me that were afraid of moving forward or resistant, because mastery with the tool is really important. And the more time you spend with the tool, the better you get at it. And when you know you've developed all this expertise and capability, it becomes really painful to leave that behind and to start over again with learning a new tool. So I think we can argue from both directions. I don't think anyone can argue about whether or not modern engines like Unity and Unreal can outperform legacy engines like what we saw with Quake and iterations of Quake, the Source engine and the Valve did. I loved working with what you call Hammer was called Worldcraft back when we developed the Half-Life games that my company worked on. And of course it had to change from Worldcraft because there's some people at Blizzard that felt like they owned the word craft, and there was a big bit of litigation between Valve and Blizzard back then. So Valve just decided to change the name. But I love that engine. The editor was really neat. Jan started it, and he was a modder. He was a fan of Half-Life, and a fan of Quake, and he started building this tool to generate the data sets that it would publish. And Valve ultimately hired Jan and made him part of the team. And that tool iterated over time, and there was a lot of neat features about it. There was, in my experience, there's something rare that happens when fans that are capable pick up from where developers leave off and create their own tools, that sometimes the fan tools are better than the developer tools. I've experienced this over and over and over again in my career, where when we're creating tools for ourselves, we do just enough to get by, just the barest minimum, and they're usually a mess. Whereas fans sometimes imagine that like we're way ahead of things, and they build what they imagine we had to work with instead of what we actually have to work with, and they tend to be way better off. In many cases, I remember when I first got my hands on the original Unreal editor, and what Tim Sweeney had created there was a tool that felt to me like the kind of tool you'd make if you imagine that the other people making first-person shooters are using way better tools than they're actually using. And it was superior in every way to what we had in-house. But it's a constant evolution, and we're going to have to each make that decision about when we let go of old stuff and start to embrace new stuff. And if we hold on to old stuff too long, eventually we will become obsolete. So we have to kind of find that balance between evolution and adaptation versus just sticking to what works. But Source is a really powerful engine, and there's still great games being made for it. So if you have mastery there and it's faster for you for what you're trying to do, go for it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, you can come to the mic and ask questions.
If anybody has a question and you want to just jump up to the mic.
Speaking of technology leaps, what was the most exciting technology leaps you've seen in game creation tools and engines? And as a part of that question, how excited initially you got when you realized, when touching the build engine, that you can put rooms on top of the rooms?
Room over room in build, and
Yeah, that was
for biggest technology leap.
For me, and I think it might have to do with the fact that there was a big gap between when I started doing stuff. I'd been doing casual games for 2 or 3 years, but for me, it was originally Unity, because you could do so much stuff right in the editor, the animator, you just almost everything except for the 3D modeler you could do in there. And now, of course, Unreal is doing that too. But the room over room, that was Alan, who I remember the day it happened. The first one was, of course, in the Hollywood Holocaust, the first level where you go up that spiral staircase. And by then, as they found out, Alan Bloom and Todd Plogel, who was the coder, they both did Duke Nukem way back as an amateur game.
Yeah.
And
They were side scrollers initially.
Side
and then,
scrollers, yeah. And then came over to work with Apogee as a publisher, and just it grew from there. But Alan is a programmer himself too. He sort of knew how the rendering in the engine worked, and realized that you could put a room above room as long as you couldn't see both rooms at the same time. And so he thought, well, if you go in and he used a spiral staircase. That's what I thought was
very clever.
Very clever. Like we had already been doing it with elevators, where you would go up an elevator as long as there wasn't a window looking out into the same place at the same time, you were okay. But
you built a map, a multiplayer map, where it was basically 3 or 4 maps all on top of each other, and it was like this crazy level over level scenario with using teleporters and occlusion that when I looked at it in the editor, I'm like, how did you even build this thing?
Yeah, we had to be careful.
It was impossible.
It was one of those kind of cool, gimmicky kind of things. It wasn't a great.
No, but you did it, I think, to prove that it could be done.
Yeah,
it was more of like
I did it
level designer challenge.
Because I was drinking some vodka that
day. A lot of vodka.
But no, I had taken it, and you had to keep the 4 rooms separately. But in order to build that room above room, you have to build the lower room and then the upper room, and then you have to make it so that when you bring it over in the editor and put the one on top of the other, the important vertices are matched up, and they by themselves will click together. And then, so what you have there is you actually, in the editor, you have a room inside another room. It is only a 2D representation. And then I thought, well, you could do that with 4 or 5. And it's called Teardrops. It's a deathmatch level.
Yeah, Teardrops. That's right. Yeah, that was insane.
4 rooms. Each room has an exit and entrance, north and south, and then there's an outside corridor, so you can get to each one. Or from inside each room, you could jump into a portal, a hole that would teleport you to.
So if anybody's played with the build engine or still playing with the build engine, and you want to unravel the most insane headache of a map that exploits the way that room over room stuff works, look up Levelord's Teardrops map. It's the most extreme example of how to exploit that.
It's actually not that hard.
Feature.
You just have to keep the rooms separate while you're working on it.
It's impossible. It's impossible.
And then there's another one called Lunar Cycle, but it's two helix, like Alan's spiral stairs, but 2 of them put together So as you're walking around, one is green alien, and then you come into the human side, but they're both really there.
I did some stuff actually in the plutonium pack in the boss map, where I was doing a room over room exploitation to get in and out of had a big outside area and then you could go inside, and then I built tunnels out of sprites because we could do flat sprites to create the illusion of another level, and then I put water in it because remember when you go in and out of water, that's yet another to kind of create this feeling that there's a lot of dimensionality, even though it's still a 2.5D engine basically. I remember having that same impulse to try to exploit those idiosyncrasies. Any other questions? Go ahead. Yeah, when the mic is empty, if you get there, you'll be next, and I'll notice, and we'll go to you faster. So.
Sorry for my poor English. First of all, I want to say great thanks for games what you make. First, I played in Blood 20 years ago. Last time I played Blood, it's yesterday.
Wow, that's awesome.
I have strange non-game dev questions for Richard. On this photograph, you look like not typical game developer or like cool true biker. Do you ride motorcycle?
No. I've had motorcycles, but not that kind. No, I don't know why I've got this cut-off T-shirt, except for it's my first year or two in Texas. I was from up north, and I ask anyone that knows me, I'm too hot all the time.
Thank you.
Who was that?
Also, this picture was taken at a get-together that a fan organized to play a competitive tournament at a pub in Fort Worth. And my hypothesis is, well, I'm going to Fort Worth.
Gotta look
I
like
may as well look the part, So,
Put the boots
by the
on.
way, that fan is that tall, skinny guy there with the blue shirt.
Yeah.
His name's Charlie Wiederhold, and he started as a fan, created a map, and put together this tournament at this Fort Worth pub. Years later, he ended up joining 3D Realms, and he became the producer of Duke Nukem Forever. So. Sometimes when fans take over projects, other things can happen. I love Charlie. He's a great designer, but man, those guys had to struggle with impossibilities for over a decade in order to keep that dream alive. Go ahead.
Hello. Thank you for the great talk. So to ask a question, first of all, I need to tell that, well, creating games like Duke Nukem 3D or Duke Nukem Forever takes lots of iterations. So it's kind of a history of development. Like you have some ideas at start, they are changing, and then some things go wrong, you change it, etc., etc. For example, looking at pre-alpha build for Duke Nukem 3D, like completely different sprites, completely different effects, different maps. So first, my question, is it possible to see some kind of the commentary, historical-wise, to see why you changed it or what it should be, why it didn't work? Oh, just what were the ideas? And the second part is, what about the Duke Nukem Forever builds that you were talking about in Twitter? Just for history, not about some modding or something, but just to see them, to touch them, to play a bit if they're not really playable, but still to see them in working.
You want to take any of the first part was about versions of Duke 3D, like changes that happen in the project over time.
What you're seeing there is more of, I wasn't there for Duke Nukem Forever, but it happens. Anything creative, it happens, where you're working and about halfway through, you get another idea for something better, and it is better, but you're best to stay on the, what's the expression? Don't change horses in the middle of the river. Mm-hmm. Like you're halfway across the river on this horse. Don't get on that horse because it looks like it's a better horse. But the changes that you're seeing, I know that he's seeing the pre-builds.
He's also looking at there was a version that that was released after you left 3D. After both of us left 3D Realms, they released something they called Lame Duke. Yeah. And it was basically a version of Duke 3D a year before it launched. Yeah. So there was a lot of art that was different because it was before Dirk and Doug Wood and
And David Demerin.
Yeah, and before, the British kid that made all the guns. James Story. He was so good. We lost James. He's not with us anymore.
Yeah. But a lot of the stuff you're seeing there is placeholders, is temporary art. And then that was back when I was saying I had a choice between Blood, that was a far superior looking game, and play and everything. And Duke Nukem at the time looked like what you're seeing in Lame Duke, where it was like, ooh, no.
That was strange.
And then I thought, no, ooh, id. So that's why. And I'm glad that of course, Blood's a great game still, but Duke Nukem turned out to be more like me. But yeah, what you're seeing there is a lot of just placeholder art and temporary stuff. That still happens now.
Yeah.
You need to demonstrate to somebody. A lot of times you have to show somebody, this is what I want to do, and you need to show them that it's going to be cool. And so you just grab art and put it in there.
So with respect to Duke Nukem Forever, there's three things I think that are in the way of releasing stuff. The first thing that's in the way is, long before Gearbox had anything to do with it, Take-Two had the publishing rights. And so anything officially released has to be blessed by the folks that own it. And that's not me, so we have to kind of work with them. And they're great partners, and they've suggested they're willing, but they're a business, so putting effort into things that cost them, time or energy, or that could be a risk for them, has to be justified in some way. The second thing is that there's a massive gap between the reality and the expectation that was created by 3D Realms during the beginning of Duke Nukem Forever. Those first trailers, the trailer that happened in 1999 and the trailer that happened in 2001, were incredible. And I wasn't at 3D Realms at the time. I had already started Gearbox by then, and we were watching and thought, this is just awesome stuff. We can't wait for this game. It turns out that there was a huge amount of smoke and mirrors to create those trailers, and the audience believes that a whole game exists, but in fact they're just fragments that were created or pressed into the service of making that trailer to represent a game that didn't exist at all. There's the third piece, and actually there's probably a fourth, and I'll say that I'll make the fourth the third so I can save the third for the last. So the next one is the actual state of the stuff. There was no really great source control that 3D Realms had back then. So what exists today are just piles and fragments of messy stuff that used to exist on certain developers' individual development drives. And it's like, as is, it's not really usable. It takes people that know what they're doing to be able to dig in and discover it. And there's certainly some people from the community that could figure that stuff out, but I think it would require a huge amount of disclaimer and caveat to just say, okay, here's this, have fun, but this is just a mess, so don't trust us. But I think the last thing is probably the most important thing, and this is that what that is not really mine or Gearbox's or 3D Realms' or Take-Two's. It's actually the work of people, real talent and developers who did what no developer should. Some of these guys were so committed to their dream and their vision that they stayed with it, including Alan, for 15 years. And I think that if anyone's going to decide that the road that was taken can be exposed for all of us to dig through, it should be the people that did it, right? It's like, for history, we could go through your garbage and learn something about your life. And we can go into your house and dig through all your drawers and look what you have hidden under the bed. But without your consent, that's, to me, unethical and immoral. And that, I think, is the most compelling reason why, I felt maybe we should respect the actual people that live through that wish. And you know, someday we'll all be dead, and the data's there somewhere. And when we're dead, we don't have to care anymore. So maybe some people that come later might care and decide to dig into some of that stuff. But I don't think it's my right to do that. So yeah, thanks.
Okay, we're out of time, unfortunately. No, we're very strict, shall you here. Are you going to participate in the Bye-Bye Mingle afterwards? Because maybe the people can ask your questions after the awards, here on the bridge area. So yeah, thank you very much for your fireside chat.